Good evening, all, and welcome back to Bedtime Stories in our story time collection here at Red Shirts Remastered. This one right here has been recovering from surgery. He had his balls chopped off. He also had his stomach stapled to his ribs. So, he's been recovering, which is why Bedtime Stories has been on hold. But we're glad to be back. And let's continue with the puppy kissing me. Hi, get down, please. You're still recovering, baby. Good boy. Go lay down. All right. Boy, he really messes up the lighting, doesn't he? Once again, we are reading Look Out for the Little Guy by Scott Lang, a.k.a. Ant-Man, a.k.a. Paul Rudd, a.k.a. really the book is by Rob Kuttner. We're, I believe, on chapter 11, so we will continue. And the chapter is titled Farewell, Nat. As first impressions go, I got a pretty clear one of Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, in our first encounter. She and I were at Leipzig-Halle Airport, and on opposite sides of that nasty intra-Avengers divide a few years ago. The battle had brought me face to face with her, and knowing so very little about Black Widow's capabilities, I said something that makes me laugh to this day. Look, I really don't want to hurt you. Nat replied, I wouldn't stress about it. Then there were no more words. She went all in on me, landing a solid kick right in my most delicate spot, followed by 3 more blows than I could follow. I went tiny and managed to flip her, still at ant size. I tried pulling her arm behind her back when suddenly zap, an electric shock from her Black Widow's bite, a high-tech defense system surrounding her wrists, blew me clear of her and splatted me into something hard and metallic. That was literally and figuratively a shock, but not to anyone else who knew it and worked with Nat. It seemed like everyone had a story about her, or dozens. Cap couldn't stop talking about her jaw-dropping exploits on missions. There was the time he, she, and Sam were trying to stop the Winter Soldier, but only Nat was able to fake out the soldier, then get close enough to land on his shoulders and wrap a choke cord around his neck. Or the time the 3 of them were in Scotland trying to save Wanda and Vision, and the Mind Stone in his head from Thanos' hench creeps. Cap, Falcon, and Wanda, of course, got in a few good shots, but once again, only Nat got right in there and managed to stab the bruiser named Corvus with his own glowing scepter, prompting a hasty bad guy retreat. Clint, too, had been in action with Nat a lot. Heck, they started their working relationship off with him being ordered to assassinate her. But nowadays, he couldn't help rattling off her greatest hits. He regaled me with the time the 2 of them were trying to get a hold of the regeneration cradle before Ultron could get his shiny hands on it. How Nat rode a motorcycle right from the Quinjet onto a busy highway, retrieved Cap's shield from snarling traffic, evaded an explosion by sliding her cycle sideways, jumped into a truck to get the regeneration cradle, then finally rode that giant piece of high-tech machinery midair into the Quinjet from an exploding flying truck. All in about 10 minutes. But I want to tell you something more about Nat that she was like when she wasn't kicking butt. Now, admittedly, I never got to know Nat that well, but when the Avengers asked me to tell their story to the world, they made sure to fill me in on everything they could about the Avenger who never made it home. It wasn't always easy to learn about her. Even to those who knew her best, Natasha Romanoff was always a woman of secrets. Secret past, secret family, surprisingly even a secret dislike of shawarma. Secrecy was part of her mystique. And it was often one of her greatest weapons. After all, her first introduction to Tony Stark was infiltrating his company and spying on him by pretending to be his new assistant, Natalie Rushman. Not many people can pull one over on Tony Stark. Nat was not many people. And of course, it's pretty much Avengers legend at this point how during their days as a fledgling team, Nat managed to wrest mission-critical information out of Loki by deceiving him about her true intentions. Let me repeat that. Natasha Romanoff once managed to trick the universe's greatest trickster. In a lighter vein, Cap told me about how when the two of them were trying to neutralize the Winter Soldier threat, they were on the run from what they'd just learned was a compromised shield. They had to go incognito to a mall and hack into shield computers while pretending to be a newly engaged couple. As usual, Nat committed to the role and above and beyond, even stopping on an escalator to plant what Cap later described to me as an extremely convincing kiss on him to evade detection. And for every war story Cap had about fighting alongside Nat, he had another of her just being, well, alongside at critical and painful moments. He remembered Nat's quiet strength and presence at multiple times, whether watching Nick Fury appear to die on the operating table or being a comfort during the emotional funeral of his decades ago but lost to time true love, Peggy Carter. Clint, too, presented a different side of Nat. He spoke of how after the blip took away his entire family, he dealt with his grief by spiraling into a bloody vigilantism. Then one night in Tokyo, he'd just finished taking out a Yakuza crime boss and his minions and saw a figure waiting for him. It was Nat, come to sell him on my time heist idea and the possibility of undoing the snap. Clint was struck by the fact that Nat could have easily joined the fight, either dispatching the thugs more quickly or stopping Clint in his tragedy-crazed tracks. Instead, she just waited him out until he was calm enough to truly hear her. In one of my few moments with Natasha, I too saw the power of her quiet strength and empathy. When I first showed up at Avengers Compound after escaping the quantum realm, I could see there had been tears in Nat's eyes. Couldn't imagine the burden she'd laid upon herself those past 5 years of still trying to save a half-liquidated world, but somehow she held it all in there, together. Of all the fights he's been in with her, next to and sometimes against, Clint said the one that struck him the most was the fight Nat chose not to have. The two of them were on the planet Vormir, carrying out their time heist assignment to retrieve the Soul Stone. The being guarding the stone, Clint described him as a big red floating guy, explained that the only way to obtain the stone was to leave a life behind. Someone would have to sacrifice their own life for the very much at that moment non-guaranteed chance to save billions. And that's when things got really intense. Clint and Nat, these friends who had come to the brink of death so many times together, were now faced with the literal brink and the unavoidable death of one of them. But which one? Clint felt powerfully that at long last it was finally time for someone else to save Nat. And furthermore, that his life at this point was undeserving of yet one more Nat save. He reminded her of what he'd become since the snap and how death was an appropriate remedy for him. Then Nat said something that pierced more precisely into Clint than any of his arrows could have. I don't judge people on their worst mistakes. Clint pretended to accept her decision and then tripped her, prepared to make his own leap, and left her with what he thought would be his last words. Tell my family I love them. And that, Clint believes, is what ultimately cast the die for Nat. Clint had a family to go love, and so did Nat, the Avengers. And this was how she was going to show her love to them. Put Natasha Romanoff's physical prowess together with that love, and you've got the universe's most unstoppable force. She charged for the cliff. The two struggled, but Clint said that in the end, Natasha just couldn't be held back. Even the normally granite-faced Clint started to tear up as he recalled his and Nat's last moments together. Dangling from her grappling hook cord on the side of the cliff, Clint iron-gripping Nat's hand to keep her from falling. Of course, she ultimately prevailed, escaping his fingers and plummeting into both sacrifice and history. Nat's last words in this life were, "Let me go," which to Clint sounded less like "loosen your grip," and more like what he and really everyone I spoke to agreed could have been Nat's life motto: "Allow me to be the one who goes." After hearing all these stories, I'd wish I'd gotten to spend more time with Nat, gotten to know her better, to the extent anyone could. But even my few brief encounters with Natasha Romanoff were as supercharged as her electrified wrists, so I'm really grateful to the Avengers for giving me this chance to experience through their eyes what it was like to live, work, and fight alongside a legend. And speaking of fights and wrist shocks, if you're somehow reading this somewhere, Nat, don't worry about that first tussle we had. Because in the end, the only person who got hurt was me for not getting to be your pal. Chapter 12. Go big, then go home. Beyond hearing the Avengers' full story, I suspect there's at least one other reason you bought this book, unless you're a friend of or family member that I guilted into coming to a book signing. It's because you're curious to hear what it's like to be small. But I have a saying: to know what it is to be small, you must first know what it is to be big. So I also want to share what going ginormous in the Ant-Man suit feels like from inside the suit because, like so many things I've experienced, it's given me a new perspective. Specifically, that getting big can be extremely dangerous, but not only in the way you might think. My first bout with this section is called Giant Lab Rat. My first bout with enlargement was in Hank Pym's lab. This one had been built with super high ceilings for this exact purpose, and I was a little nervous. I hit the regular button and boom, big me. Now I had been expecting the sudden shoot up into the air. What I didn't expect was that I would suddenly feel off balance. I began to teeter, which is the last thing you want when you're in a position to squash tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment plus an amazing woman you really, really want to love you. Even worse, on the inside I was flailing for emotional balance. Every suddenly enlarged fiber of me was screaming, this was a mistake. What if my body just couldn't handle this? What if I returned to my original size permanently damaged from the experiment? And worst of all, what if I let down Hope and Hank? Here I was, on the cusp of being handed a new shot at life, one that basically no one else could, not my ex-wife or prospective employers, was willing to give me. What if I just couldn't become this hero that two strangers improbably were trying to make me into? What if I was forced back into a life of crime because maybe I really didn't have any other use in the world? Then I remembered something. How I'd first gone small when I fooled around with the Ant-Man suit. I'd pilfered from Hank's safe and hit the shrink button. That was nothing short of terrifying. Within the space of a few minutes, I was nearly drowned, crushed, stabbed by a phonograph needle, and crushed again. But what I remembered was when that happened, little old no good ex-con me had pulled some fast moves, kept my wits about me, and emerged from that in one piece and ready to fight another day. I now realized that day had come and that I was indeed ready. I knew that I could be as big on the inside as I was on the outside, and then the experimental effects hit my brain and I passed out, but with a tiny/huge smile on my face. Giant in Germany. My next outing as Big Me came when I was thrust into that epic intra-superhero throwdown at Leipzig-Halle Airport. It was a brutal scene all around. Our team was taking it hard. We needed a Hail Mary, and I quickly realized it was sitting right there in the dime-sized red button on my glove. However, truth be told, I was still doubting myself on the inside. Even though I'd mentally pulled it together at Pym Labs, I still wasn't able to physically stay on my feet for more than a few minutes. That was not a ton of battle time. I was already mentally gaming out a best case scenario of how many combatants I could take down before I fainted this time. I wasn't feeling optimistic. And then Cap said three words that changed everything. Are you sure? Not exactly an inspiring speech from a football coach in a movie, but as I hope I've made clear by now, when one of the bravest men on the planet gives you a yes or no choice for me, that's not a choice. I hit the button. But unlike in the lab trial now, there was no time or mental bandwidth really to focus on my feelings because now everything was suddenly happening to me all at once. 1 second I was midair clutching War Machine's ankles. The next I was swinging him through the air by his. I was attempting to clobber the King of Wakanda by kicking a bus. I had Spider-Man in my eye. Then I had vision passing through my innards. And then I felt my legs start to lock up, and as before in the lab, I began to stagger. But it wasn't for the same reason this time. My head was still relatively clear. No, this was a loss of balance because deliberately brought on by Spider-Man tying a web rope around my legs and blabbing on about The Empire Strikes Back, which, by the way, excellent taste, kid. Then out of nowhere, Rhodey and Tony Stark gave me a double KO punch, and I was going down. For the record, it is way more unsettling to be helplessly plummeting into the ground when you're fully awake for it. And that was nothing compared to what my body felt when it made full contact with the tarmac. I can't even count how many kinds of pain my giant-sized nervous system was taking in. But you know where I was feeling good? In my heart. Sure, I'd once again only lasted a few minutes at jumbo scale before taking a fall, but this time I'd fallen in a battle where I, again until recently a guy no one would even trust to scoop ice cream, had pounded some formidable foes, and even better come through for my friends. I quickly reverted to standard size, but in my mind I was still feeling giant. San Francisco Giant. Go team. Nice pun on words, play on words there. If I learned one thing from my first two enlargements, it was choose a softer surface to crash onto. Enter San Francisco Bay. This time, the feeling was completely different. I had a little more suit experience under my belt. Also, I didn't have a cavalcade of butt kicking heroes assaulting me. And finally, my mission in this case was a lot more specific, quicker, and literally smaller. All I had to do was grab a tiny lab chunking down to the size of a suitcase. So I was feeling confident, but perhaps a bit more confident than I should have. We can blame Cap for that. I went big, inside and out, assured I could handle anything, and I did manage to get my massive hands on the tiny lab. Success! However, I only know this because, as endless loops of local news footage reminded me later, I loudly bragged about it like a drunken sailor to a deck full of terrified ferry passengers. I let my temporary God mode go to my head, and my head was actually the main issue right then, because my brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. A problem I knew about with giant man mode, but had failed to take seriously or train myself for. Apparently, I had overcompensated for my past doubts by shifting all the way over into thinking I was invincible. And that's when the air in my suit told me otherwise. As I gasped desperately to breathe, I found myself once again being forcibly brought back down to earth. Well, technically down into the bay. A softer landing, yes, but personally, a harder fall. And there's a nice picture here of him falling in the bay. Says I don't remember this moment very well, so I'm very grateful to whichever local newscopter took this photo. Giant versus Thanos. But fear not, I was saved from what could have been a permanent fishnet by hope. Apparently, it takes more than 3 falls to keep a good, constantly size shifting man down. Which is a good thing because not long after that, I emerged from the quantum realm and found myself in a blipped world in need of a big solution. I've already detailed the circumstances that brought me there and what went down after, but for now, I just want to note that the big battle with Thanos was the very first time in my brief but extremely eventful heroing career when I'd finally found out how to be the big the right way. Obviously, there were external differences. I was in better shape, and the adrenaline of facing down basically Armageddon in upstate New York overrode my emotions. It also didn't hurt that, unlike in Germany, I was actually fighting on the same side as all my colleagues. So there I was, slipping back and forth between big and small mode, rescuing my pals from rubble of Avengers compound, and then racing into the battle of my life on my titanic feet. I crushed one of Thanos' soldiers and didn't bat an eye when I came face to face with one of his massive leviathans. This time I didn't give myself mental space for either doubt or braggadocio. I just went for it. And when my left uppercut connected with the giant robo-kaiju lizard, he went down so fast that rush gave me the energy to stay on my feet longer than I'd ever managed before this point. But the real difference, the thing that I'd retained despite multiple blows to the head and one near drowning, was that this time I finally knew when to stop being big. Giant final thoughts. And that's the lesson I took away from all this. Getting to step into significantly larger shoes, whether literally or just in our ordinary lives, can have two equally dangerous effects on our psyches. We can shrink in self-doubt from what we're truly capable of, or we can inhabit our new powerful boldly but forget the humble size we began as. Because at some point... Hi. Hey, buddy. I'm trying to read a book here. Okay. Thank you. Because at some point in our lives, or maybe 2 or 3, most of us get the chance to be the big one relative to someone else. We just find ourselves there, whether it's on the playground or the break room or just being around our kids. For a lot of people, it can be overwhelming, as it was for me. But the scarier part is, for many, it can also be straight up addictive. Even the most diminutive of us at some moment has someone else's life or status or feeling in our hands. And even if that wasn't our doing, but just how the cards were dealt, we should never view that situation as anything but temporary. After all, the next day we might be the ones under someone else's thumb. For a guy who frequently goes small like me, that's not just a metaphor. Which is exactly why we should never get too attached to our dominance or make that our outlook on others and the world. We should never exploit that extra piece of bigness for small reasons. And we should definitely never ever use that bit of leverage to try and make ourselves even bigger. Because that's just not how we humans were meant to be or how we work best. I have a lab floor, airport tarmac, and a part of the San Francisco Bay that will attest to this. That is why I'm actually glad that the Ant Man suit doesn't make it possible for me to stay large too long. Admittedly, this can make combat trickier, or to be more precise, shorter. But it also keeps my perspective wiser. It literally doesn't let me get a big head. So in a way, this brings me full circle. To know how to be big, first you must remember what it is like to be small. Frequently asked Ant-Man questions. We have a major ant infestation, but don't want to have an exterminator fill our house with poison. Could you come talk to them? Boy, would love to. There are a few greater rushes I get than from sending out those olfactory signals and watching little guys get into lockstep formation and listen to my every word. They are possibly the only sentient creatures in my life who do. Unfortunately, I've learned the hard way that I can't ask them to do too much. They are, after all, independent beings with their own biological imperatives and agendas, just living their best ant lives, and my typical requests take them away from that. So I have to be extremely selective with what I ask of them. Otherwise, the next time I need a high security duck infiltrated or a signal decoy stolen, they might just spell out the words, do it yourself, two legs. So I'd say look at when they're coming in and seal that off and eliminate any spilled food or water that might be drawing them in. And yeah, you also might want to try some lemon juice. ah, regrets. I've had a ton. Chapter 13. I hope by now we've gotten comfortable enough for me to lay something on you that's so shocking I'm struggling to even type out the words. I've made a few mistakes in my time. Okay, maybe more than a few. But fortunately, I've learned a few things from those mistakes along the way. And even more fortunately for you, I'd love to share. No more pool parties. For instance, take my whole incident with my former employer, the secretly embezzling millions Vista Corp. Do I regret getting caught? Every single day. Do I regret the hack itself? Never. That was the part I got right. Because just like the actions I take part in when my fellow heroes' fists, feet, and capes are flying, there are key moral values at play. Protect the innocent and the aggression, restore justice. But at the same time, I've also come to understand my real mistake. It wasn't breaking into VistaCorp servers to return the money they stole from customers. That's where I should have quit while I was ahead. No, my mistake was making the whole operation into the Scott Lang Good Times Hero Hour. I had already blown the whistle. I could have just stolen the money from VistaCorp and quietly returned it to the victims, but instead, I had to show off, post all the bank records online, and drive a car into a pool. I turned what could have been a private, quiet moment of doing the right thing into 3 years away from my kid. Love always means always having to say you're sorry. A lot of people have asked me how I managed to ruin a perfectly good marriage with Maggie. Well, I've given this a lot of thought over a lot of time and finally come to understand what my biggest actual mistake was in this case. It was not sharing with my life partner everything, not just my own plans regarding VistaCorp. That was more like the final straw in a lot of strategic miscommunications on my part. I don't want to get into our personal details, but I've had to take a good hard look at what I chose to share versus what I believe myself entitled to decide on my own, even if those decisions impacted our family. But then, of course, I wouldn't be with Hope. But, you see how easy it is to fall into the regrets trap? It's a bottomless pit. And the only way to find the bottom is to decide for ourselves when we've done enough beating ourselves up. Fighting the good fight badly. Another bad move buried inside a good move was how I handled the big airport fight in Germany. Of course, I don't mean the going to the fight at an airport in Germany step. I'm still good with that decision. I stood up for Cap in his hour of need, and I also managed to get in some valuable networking with future Avengers colleagues. Nor, and this is still painful, do I completely regret doing this in secret from Hank and Hope with equipment I stole from them. In fairness, there was just no way I could have told them. If they were caught and questioned about it, admitted they knew what I was up to and didn't stop me, they'd be liable as accomplices. Which would extra piss off Hope because she prefers to think of me as the accomplice. Of me as the accomplice. However, as far as the stealing itself, I have to admit it, I do still feel pretty damn awful about that. All I can say is, in my defense, is two things. One, wearing the Ant-Man suit was clearly what my new superhero pals wanted from me. Two, at the very least, after the mission, and after a fun little stay in that very secret, very wet superhero prison under the East River, I did sneak the suit back to Lewis in a trophy, relatively unstained and in one piece, which is more than I can say for the tailbone I landed smack on. And funnily enough, that epic fall was also exactly where my mistake landed. Because you see, the reason I got knocked down so easily was just as with my little amphibious car driving adventure, I decided to show off instead of just showing up. There I was at Leipzig Halle Airport fighting in that, for a lack of a better term, civil war. A lot was going on really fast, but basically it wasn't going well for my side. Cap and Bucky desperately needed to get out of there and to Siberia before it was too late, but they were pinned down. Sam said on his wrist comm, "We need a diversion, something big." Well, I immediately took to that as my cue. "Yes, guy, you can do big. Now's your chance to impress these guys and prove you belong in their ranks." See how fast my brain was racing here? Before I knew it, I was giving battlefield commands as if I was Captain America and promising the use of a still quite experimental technique that I really did not have a handle on. So in the end, was it a mistake for me to go giant right then? Not entirely. Ultimately, I did manage to divide many of our then opponents. Cap and Bucky did get away as planned, and I did manage to not pass out, only to be knocked onto my butt in a completely different way. The thing is, it was also an extremely risky call on my part. Brave and creative, sure. Wise? Not so clear in hindsight. I really didn't know what I was doing with the enlargement feature, and I didn't have Hank or Hope around to offer guidance. A thousand things could have gone wrong, not only for me, but for the allies I was trying to help. I think the best thing you could say is it was a decision made for not all the best reasons that ended up with me getting lucky. And in a line of work where people often live or die based on the quality of decision making, that's not good enough. At least for me. But that's where I want to draw a key distinction. I look back at that airport decision not with regret, but with hard introspection. The difference is regret traps us, introspection frees us. Game on. So as a thought exercise, I decided to reflect on how a few key moments in my life would have turned out if I'd made different choices. And to help me with that, I checked in the world's most highly skilled gaming it out expert, my former cellmate, current colleague, and perpetual pal, Lewis. When I first asked him this, he just gave me that Lewis look, as if to say, "Hasn't your life been crazy and complicated enough without introducing alternate directions and endings?" He packs a lot into those looks, and in a way he's already gotten the point of this essay, but let's hear how Lewis broke down how I handled VistaCore. Lewis said, "All right, let's say you didn't make such a public show of what you were doing, driving that sweet car in a pool, sharing the bank records with the whole damn internet and such." I was smiling and remembering the feeling. Then Lewis's fingers snapped me back into snapping fingers snapped me back into focus. He continued, "In that case, maybe the boss man might have had a chance to catch wind of this before it went big. That would also have given him a chance to put his fall guys in place, potentially slip through the fingers of the law. So in that scenario, maybe his ride stays dry and you walk free." I had to admit it sounded pretty good, or at least preferable to 3 years in San Quentin. But Lewis wasn't done. Which would also mean Hank Pym would never learn of your existence, so he ends up hiring some less talented con. They'd mess up the Pym tech heist, and now Darren Cross is running his own private army. Yikes. But Lewis still wasn't done. But above and beyond all that, he wrapped up, is the greatest tragedy of all time. You don't go to prison, and you and I don't get to be besties. After the kind of hug that response required, I reminded Lewis that also the whole universe would have been destroyed. Then he brought me in for another hug, looked me in the eye, and murmured, "That's what I just said, amigo." Okay, no one warned me how emotionally taxing introspection can be, but I was in for the whole experience now. I decided to test out how I could have handled the whole Maggie communication issue. Lewis set the scene. Imagine a younger Scott sitting across the kitchen table from your still then wife Maggie. You've got something big to share. You take both of Maggie's hands in yours and you just tell her. Like everything. All the really bad stuff VistaCorp is up to. And then, here's the bigger deal, what you plan to do about it. Yeah, that was definitely the bigger deal. If Maggie had any notion of what lengths I was willing to go to, Lewis kept spinning out the angle. So then Maggie's sitting there taking all this in. Her hand's still in yours. Then suddenly she flips your hands around so yours are captive in hers. Wait, what now? Then, in the blink of an eye, she used her elbow to turn on the electric stove, and before you could figure out what's going on, Maggie has scalded your fingertips. I was pretty close to lost at this point, but Lewis brought it home. So for now, at least a month, can't type a single keystroke. As a hacker, you're useless. I didn't even know what to do with that. The message that Lewis's earlier look had conveyed, that this was waylay madness that was starting to become very clear. Lewis saw my look of bewilderment and my phantom finger pain and smiled. But hey, on the bright side, no divorce and you never lose Cassie. Then our smiles paled at this time. We both realized the irreducible emotional complexity of this imagined timeline. Yes, Cassie. But no Lewis. Yes, universe. And no universe. I grabbed Lewis another beer and gave him permission to stop thinking now. You see, this is where things always end up when I try to imagine alternate futures or pasts while consumed with regret. Too much changes, too many things can go wrong, and pretty soon even the people you thought you knew and cared for become unrecognizable. It's impossible to know what the exact best call is in the moment, but as I said, that's a big part of the job of being a superhero. That's why I've tried to break through the wall of regretting decisions into the more powerful place of improving how I make decisions. And I don't regret that one bit. Frequently asked Ant-Man questions. Can you introduce me to the Avengers? Man, if I had a nickel for every time I got asked this, I could pretty much buy my own Quinjet. So in brief, sorry, not really. As you might imagine, being superheroic also means they're all super busy. Clint also has his hands full with family and a new protege. And Bruce, I never know where, like even on what world he is, but he's always busy. And you didn't hear this from me, but if you really want to meet a superhero, may I humbly suggest putting yourself in mortal danger from an otherworldly being? Next chapter. Look out for the little guide. Even when I'm not in giant form, I tend to have a big mouth. I know I've been talking a big game about acting metaphorically big or little, and obviously there's the title I chose for this book. Well, technically my publisher chose it. I wanted to call it Ant Misbehavin'. But for real, to me this stuff is more than just a series of empty platitudes. I honestly feel like we're stuck in a world of people trampling on those they consider beneath them. And as a guy who spends a lot of time down at ant level, I'm very much anti-trample. So now I'm going to tell you how to look out for the little guy. But in what you've come to recognize as a signature Scott Lang move, first I'm going to talk about me. Because long before I opened Hank Pym's basement vault, I felt like an extremely tiny guy myself. I'm not talking about how I didn't even get my growth spurt until age 14. That's right, my best position on the basketball court was statistician. No, I mean in my adult life, like at VistaCorp. When I got caught wind of how this company I worked for was ripping off their customers, I was outraged. I'd seen how much my boss was raking in, and I felt rage on behalf of all those folks who'd put their trust and, of course, money into my place of business. I didn't know it yet, but inside my head, I was already heading down the path of recognizing who's the little guy in life and feeling no choice but to stand up and fight for them, or at least throw off the big guy trying to hurt them. That was what I tried to do with VistaCorp. I couldn't completely stop what they were doing, but I did manage to undo some of it. And then I was fired. To the powers that be, I might as well have been an ant. And boy, did I feel crushed under their patent leather shoes when I ended up doing hard time. But what I remember from all of that is not the bitterness. What I remember is those who looked out for me, calling or texting just to asking how they could help. And then there was my first day in prison. Take it from me, that was not an easy day for anyone of any size. But when Lewis reached out to me, I felt a tiny bit better knowing I had an ally. With his support during those long, long years, months, weeks, and let's be honest, even just mentally endless hours, I felt like I could make it to the other side. Now I've worked alongside some of the strongest and bravest superheroes who've ever walked the earth. But the heroes that have had the largest impact on my life have been the ones with no powers other than the eyes to see a person in need and the voice to offer words of support. Which brings me to you. I want to tell you something important. You, in the exact life you're in right now, can be a hero too. You don't have to fly, punch someone 3 times your size, or stop a galactic supervillain from destroying the planet to be a hero. Because you may not have super abilities, but you definitely already have two incredible powers: a heart to care and a voice to speak out. All you have to do is learn how to use them. First, heart. As you make your way through your day, take note of the people who the world shrinks. The person who foams your ridiculously complex coffee order, who delivers the food you were too lazy to cook, who cleans the bathroom you and a million people rush in and out of it in a hurry to catch your train. And when I say take note, I don't mean like pull out a megaphone and yell, "Here toils a person of honor." Instead, I mean just show them some love. A little friendly human interaction, even something as simple as a smile or a compliment on their funny t-shirt, is a way of saying, "I see you, and I don't take you for granted." But looking out goes way beyond just being nice to people in the service industry. As I've mentioned before, we can all be made to feel small in so many different ways in life. Crushed by a piece of bad news, made to feel lessened by another person's prejudices or dismissive tone, overworked, outstretched, overstretched, overlooked, even the people we assume have it all together, the ones we depend on, our rocks, well, sometimes on the inside, they're barely pebbles. It's easy to pay attention to the folks who loom large, the alpha silverback gorillas loudly beating their chests and taking up the room. The challenge is to turn your attention away from them to the ones they're taking it away from. The good news is, you don't need Pym particles to instantly make someone feel bigger. Just like you can use your heart to join forces with the little guys, you can use your voice to join them on the battlefield. To be clear, I'm not necessarily suggesting you jump in and meddle in someone's life. People's boundaries are critical and fragile, and they do need to be respected. And people who are feeling small do not need a sudden unhired publicist announcing that to the world. Instead, and here I'm really pushing this metaphor to its breaking point, hang on, metaphor, you can do this, start small. Cassie took this photo of me and sends it as a reply text when she feels like I'm acting small, but joke's on her because I think I look very cute here. Barely see him there in the middle of the picture. Because folks try all kinds of ways to hide their troubles. In our world, sadly, there's nothing more uncool than being an actual real live person with real live vulnerabilities. But ultimately, it's all visible in their eyes. And that's how you can reach someone safely across that curtain of cool. Whatever their fast moving mouth or lying smile try to tell you, you can see when something makes their gaze falter. For instance, I can still remember this guy Lenny who worked janitorial duty at San Quentin. That's a pretty terrible job, and I couldn't do anything to change Lenny's situation. But what I could do was greet him every single day for 3 years with a fist bump and a sincere, "Thanks, Lenny, this place looks beautiful." That joke never got old or funny, but it reminded Lenny that he had humanity outside of this cage and that someone else knew it. We humans have gotten used to ignoring, overlooking, or flat out denying the signal that says, "I'm in a bad place," but it's often in our faces, and there's no hiding it. So when you detect that signal, that's your time to move, flash the other person a look that says, like Lewis did to me, "You got this." Give them the optical assurance that they, too, will eventually emerge from the prison of their current plight. If it's someone you regularly speak to or have interactions with and you know in more detail what they're going through, you can also use your voice, but be tactical here as well. Don't just go for the "is everything okay?" Because that's the megaphone problem again. It might just trigger them to redouble their emotional armor and retreat further into their lonely smallness. Instead, try something more like, "I'm here if you need me." 9 times out of 10, they won't actually take you up on the offer. Honestly, what they're most likely to pick up on is that they're just two powerful first words. "I'm here." Just that reminder that they're not alone can make someone feel like they're giant enough to tackle the challenges ahead. Also, occasionally, you might be a direct eyewitness to someone using their bigger size, or status, or wealth, or whatever, to make someone else feel inferior. But guess what? That voice of yours can do just as much to make someone feel big as my little blue enlarger discs. When you see someone cutting someone else down, whether through status, money, race, gender, or anything, even the quietest, "That's not cool," or "Take it easy," can ring out louder than the Hulk stepping barefoot on a thumbtack. It may not stop the big shot currently in mid-power trip, but it sends them a strong message. That message, this person you're picking on has an ally now. That means they're effectively twice as big as you. 9 times out of 10, that is all it takes for a bully to back off. But equally importantly, it sends a message to the target of their attempted cutdowns. That message, you're not alone in this or anything. And that, last time for this metaphor, I swear, feels huge. And that is the last chapter we are going to cover today. Because I believe the next one, yeah. And we have one more frequently asked Ant-Man question. Do you do birthday parties is the question. Answer. I would love to. However, and this is kind of embarrassing for me to admit, I've become a little traumatized by them. It all goes back to Cassie's birthday the year I got out of prison. I went over to her house to surprise her. I hadn't seen my little peanut in 3 years, back when she was even a tinier legume. Can you imagine how exciting this was for me? Sadly, it was a lot less exciting for her mom, Maggie, and her new almost stepdad, who were not expecting me, as this didn't fall under our custody arrangement. They basically kicked me out in the full sight of a very saddened Cassie and Daddy. Surprise! And then, after missing out on so many of Cassie's birthdays between prison and being stuck in the quantum realm during the blip, I made yet one more miscalculation and tried to surprise Cassie with an over-the-top birthday extravaganza to make up for the missed ones. I'm talking mimes, 8 entire cakes, and 4 bouncy castles, which it turns out was precisely 4 bouncy castles too many. Because remember, at this point, Cassie was a teenage girl. So I'll leave it to your imagination how well an unexpected, huge, needy, attention-grabbing stunt from her dad went over. Superhero, super cringe. So please, have a happy birthday. But maybe tell your friends and family, no surprises. And with that, we will pick up the next chapter tomorrow evening. Sorry, not tomorrow, Wednesday. Tomorrow will be D&D. But the next chapter will be Ant on the Wall. And yeah, thank you for hanging out. Hope everyone is snug and has their warm beverage. And will have a good evening and good night all. Take care.